And welcome to Leave Us Alone, the podcast that champions individual freedom and limited government. I'm Grover Norquist, and today we're diving into taxes, getting Trump's tax cut made permanent and whole, and some cheerful news about how evil tax increasers were thwarted. And then we're going to be share an interview with you that we did with Dan Schneider, who is with the Media Research Center. He's been a longtime conservative activist. He has worked for all the good guys on the House and the Senate side. Now is fighting for free speech and has a good plan to defund National Public Radio, and also some real insights. I didn't know how bad it gotten over at Wikipedia. That was interesting. Looking forward to that.
It's a really great interview. I think folks will be excited to hear about the scandalous activity going on at both Wikipedia and NPR, and how Republicans have an opportunity here to defund this.
Mike, what have you got that we should be focused on?
Well, we do have a victory here to celebrate, and that is the death of a very stupid idea, an effort to undermine President Trump's campaign agenda of across-the-board income tax for every level of income. And that was discussion that we've had here for ATR. We've been counting for 26 days, in which all of the establishment media has had the opportunity to write the story about. Actually, Republicans are considering raising taxes. And this was the specific idea, either the creation of a new millionaires tax, which we've seen proposals in Congress from the likes of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, and Democratic governors going on right now in places like Maryland with Governor Wes Moore doing his version of a millionaires tax. There was discussion that this would be included in Republicans' tax bill in their effort to renew the Trump tax cuts. And the other discussion was to allow the top income rate to expire from 37% up to nearly 40%, which would have represented a major tax increase on small business owners who pay 95% of which pay through the individual side of the tax code.
Now, listeners, you may say to yourself, wait a minute, I thought almost every Republican had signed the pledge never to raise taxes. True. I thought President Trump ran on a big, beautiful tax cut that he passed in 2017 that reduced tax rates for every single American who pays taxes, and that he wanted to continue those for every single American. How in the world could we have ended up with a conversation lasting 26 days about something that was never going to happen? And that gets to the point that the establishment press always wants to write the story. Some Republican somewhere, maybe the guy was a Republican 30 years ago, maybe he's not in office anymore, maybe he's just a staffer with no authority to do anything about anything, but in this case, they had a staffer at the White House who was telling them, oh, yeah, we're thinking about this. The White House is thinking about this, hinting that the president supported it, I got calls from press saying, well, I understand that lots of Republicans in the House and Senate want to do this. I said, I am talking to everybody, and we're seeing almost nothing that's for that. And even the people who suggest they're for it haven't even thought it through. They didn't realize this tax increase they wanted would have hit many, many millions of small businesses, because a lot of businesses pay the personal income tax, not the corporate income tax. And there's going to be some pretty large businesses with lots of employees. This was an attack on Main Street medium and small businesses. And somehow the press thought that this would get across, Republican leadership in the House and Senate, who always held tight firm. They were never going to support this thing. And President Trump, who, when it got in front of him, said, this is the dumbest political idea we've had ever in the history of Western civilization.
And there was a great piece by Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal that really nailed what was going on here. And then the game that was being played was you had White House staff, and it's been reported by Fox Business, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post now, that what was going on is you had members in the White House Legislative Affairs team going to the Hill, going to members of Congress, and saying, this is the White House position. We need a statement from you to come out and support it to show that you back the president. Of course, it's not the president's position, but you get the member coming out with a statement. You have these anonymous staff walking elected Republican officials out into traffic, essentially, to get them to come out for a tax increase publicly, only then to find out later on that the staff is taking that statement back to the White House and saying, look, there's organic support for it. All the time while they're manufacturing fake support for members who are only doing this because they're being told it's the president's position.
You wonder, how stupid does somebody have to be to take that approach? We've seen several people claiming, well, if we raise taxes on higher income people and many, many millions of small businesses, then the establishment press and the liberal Democrats will stop saying all we want to do is have tax cuts for the rich. Now, the tax cut that Trump put forward, among other things, doubled the per-child tax credit. This is the really expensive part of the bill in terms of lost revenue, doubled the standard deduction that people had, so you could get up to $24,000 before you pay any taxes at all. This was a very serious tax cut weighted towards lower-income people. Now, on the tax rates, it cut tax rates across the board for everybody, and the left attacked it as just being for rich people the whole time. And one is reminded that when George Herbert Walker Bush was pressured by the Democrats into supporting a tax increase, he shouldn't have, but he did, and the Democrats got him to agree to raise taxes, particularly on higher income people, in 1990, and it passed. Most Republicans voted no because it was a stinking tax increase, and they'd taken the pledge. But the president broke his pledge not to raise taxes. And then in 1992, ads were run against him, millions of dollars worth of ads run against Bush by Bill Clinton, attacking him in the same ad for raising taxes and 2, cutting taxes on the rich. So even when he was raising taxes on higher income people, the ad attacked him both as a tax increaser, jerk, tax increaser, liar, lied his way into office, 2, that he was somehow for tax cuts for the rich, because that's what Democrats always say. And why would any of these bozos think that that isn't exactly what they do? And when President Trump slapped this down, he said out loud that the left and the press will just attack us anyway.
And you started to touch on it there, too. We'll get in a second to how this suffered a quick, violent death from the president. But there's no shortage of Trump on the campaign trail attacking Kamala Harris. This is her plan, specifically saying she's going to raise the tax rate to 39 to 40%. These people are going to destroy our country if you let them get into office, while talking about a top rate hike. And we'll see if we can add in that clip here.
People said there's no way. I got it approved by Congress. Can you believe that? Now they're trying to, Democrats want to raise it, and they don't know. It's hard to say would you please vote for me to raise the tax? They're going to raise it up to 39 or 40% or maybe even 50%. You better not let these people get in office. They're going to destroy what we built.
But just so important, again, to remember what the president campaigned on. All Republicans have to do here in the tax bill is to deliver on the president's agenda. It was unfortunate that we had staff actively trying to subvert what the president campaigned on, what he promised the American people. And so now let's talk about how this did. Thankfully, the president swatted this idea down once people started to ask him what he thought. And again, this is another example of which we have secret people, anonymous people in the White House, misleading people on what the president's agenda is or what he believes himself. So, Grover, can you tell us a little bit about the news that broke with Newt Gingrich first?
Yes. Well, Gingrich talked to the president, and the president sent him a note and said, you can share this. And the note said, this is not a good idea. One, the left will always attack us for not raising taxes on rich people or cutting taxes on rich people. This would undermine our original commitments. He gave all the reasons. You want to read it?
Yeah, we've pulled it up here just because it's a great thing. He said, George Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes, then proceeded to give a rather small tax increase and was obliterated. Then he says, this is perfect, Trump, and you can tell if there's any doubt that he wrote it himself. While I would love the idea of a small increase, the Democrats would probably use it against us, and we would be, like Bush, helpless to do anything about it. So if you can do it without it, you're better off trying to do so. We don't need to be the read my lips gang who lost an election for no reason.
He's explaining this as political death, and later he speaks to the fact that it's very bad economics. So Trump drove 2 stakes through it. I think he drove one a couple of days ago, and he came back to see if the corpse was moving or anything. He put another stake through it just in case.
And this is so Bloomberg reporting late yesterday around 6:30. Trump himself speaking on the record. I think would be very disruptive because the millionaires would leave the country, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office on Wednesday. Other countries that have done it have lost lots of people. They lose their wealthy people. They will be bad because the wealthy people pay the tax. And he's right about this because we've seen this at the state level. We have the 4 far left blue states that have implemented a millionaire's tax. Those 4 states just also happen to lead the country in their U-Haul statistics of people fleeing the state. So we've seen this where you implement high taxes, you're driving out business.
And when you drive out business, you drive out jobs. This was a job-killing idea. this was making the president into a liar idea. Why? How would you tolerate a staffer who tells the world, "Oh, the president lied his way into office. He's not really for this stuff. He just lied when the president wasn't lying. The president was telling the truth." The staff was running around saying the president was a liar. How disgusting.
And for listeners who aren't following politics every day, the story here is pretty simple. It's, well, Trump campaigned and said he was going to cut taxes for everyone. That's what he told Congress in his joint address to Congress in March.
Yes, in front of the world.
And then in between that time, we had some staff saying, actually, he's going to completely do a 180 and he's going to raise taxes on people. And then, no surprise, when Trump himself comes out and says, no way, there's no way he's doing that.
The good news is that across the board, you go to the 50 states, Republican governors are cutting taxes. Republican governors are moving the income tax down towards zero. More recently, Mississippi and Louisiana and Kentucky and West Virginia all passed laws saying we're going all the way to zero. Other states have gone heading half the way to zero and then hoping to go all the way themselves. So the Republican Party at governor level, at state legislative level, these are the future congressmen and senators in America. Among those governors is a future president of the United States. They're all cutting taxes and going to single rate taxes and going on to zero. There's nobody out there going, what we really need is higher taxes on people who work on Saturday.
And I think as we wrap up the tax portion here, what's incredibly important to remind everyone is that with this stupid story swatted down by the president now, we need to get back on track with the tax bill. The goal here is preventing a $4.6 trillion tax increase that automatically kicks in on the American people at the end of this year. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're not going to be raising taxes on anyone. The president's now made that clear. We're getting back to the business of cutting taxes.
And not just extending the president's tax cuts passed in 2017, but making them permanent so we don't have to come back every 5 years or every 10 years and have this discussion and have some idiot go, I have an idea, let's put a tax increase in the middle of this package. No, because we won't ever have to revisit this subject alone. We will show up and cut taxes again and again and again. We will not be held hostage each time.
And before we move on to our interview section here, just want to remind people, if you're enjoying the conversation, please take a moment to rate and review the Leave Us Alone podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us reach more listeners who care about freedom. And don't forget to share this episode with friends who value liberty. Now back to our discussion and heading into the interview.
Absolutely. Queued up. Okay, we're going to be talking now with Dan Schneider, who is the MRC Free Speech America, leading MR Free Speech America as the vice president there, graduate of Columbia Law, and he used to run the American Conservative Union, worked with Ted Cruz, Mike Pence, all the good guys in Washington, D.C. over the years, and running at MRC, Media Research Center, a really interesting set of projects on free speech. Two I want to talk about today, and tell me if I'm missing something, Dan. Your efforts to help defund National Public Radio and public broadcasting, and what in the heck is going on with Wikipedia?
Yeah. And to be very precise, we are not saying that NPR and PBS stations should all go away. They're private, not-for-profit entities. They can raise all the money they want. We just don't think that taxpayers should be forced to subsidize these entities. And right now, without really our genuine consent, NPR and PBS are getting over $500 million every year of our tax dollars. And of course, here at the Media Research Center, we've got tons and tons of studies that show how biased these entities are, how they're being used for political purposes, and we are funding them. And that direct required subsidy with taxpayer dollars could come to an end.
Is that all federal money, or does that include state money as well? Do some states write checks to them as well?
Grover, that's a great question. There are 3 different buckets, and right now all we're doing is talking about the forced taxpayer subsidies at the federal level. So that's when Congress appropriates money to what's called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's the federally chartered thing that Congress created to receive appropriations to hand out to NPR and PBS. Separate from that, lots of federal agencies like the Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and several others give competitive grant awards to NPR and PBS. And separate from that, states give tons of state tax dollars. We're not talking about those other 2 buckets of taxpayer money right now. All we're talking about is the federally appropriated money that goes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting And then by formula, CPB doles that money out to NPR and PBS. That's what needs to come to an end right now.
As we talk, Congress, House, and Senate are working on a reconciliation package. We've focused an awful lot of Americans for Tax Reform on making sure the tax cuts are permanent and big and serious and nothing's left on the table.
God bless you. God bless you for that.
Thank you. But then there's the other part, which is reducing spending, which one can do with a simple majority in the House and the Senate in a reconciliation package. You don't need to beat a filibuster on reconciliation. Is somebody on the House and the Senate side looking to take the whole $500 million away or a slice of it? What might listeners see happening this year?
Well, there's some good news and then there's some better news.
I like that.
Good news is that Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is negotiating with the Senate parliamentarian to see if the parliamentarian would allow, the cut to NPR and PBS to be included in reconciliation. And of course, Grover, all of those bird rules, the bird bath, and it gets a little dicey because it's supposed to be only mandatory spending that is subject to reconciliation. And so an argument could be made that since these two media outlets get what's called 2-year advance appropriations, that maybe it could come within the bird rule. The better news is that we expect President Trump very soon to send up what's called a rescission package to Congress. And I'm sure you educated your listeners on what a rescission package is. But we expect this to come up soon. Right now, we're expecting both of the 2-year advanced appropriation for CPB, NPR, PBS to be included in that. So that'd be a $1.1 billion savings.
Wow.
In addition to some AID money. And that, just like reconciliation, would avoid the 60-vote threshold in the Senate. And so we are pushing Congress, the House and the Senate, to be prepared for this rescission package and to vote for it.
So how does a rescission package avoid the dangers of a filibuster?
Well, it's just like reconciliation. It's privileged too. So when the Senate Majority Leader calls it for a vote, it cannot be filibustered, that 60-vote threshold. It can be amended. Amendments can be offered, but like reconciliation, it avoids that 60-vote threshold. So the question now for us, well, let me just pause here. I know that these are technical things, but reconciliation is a function of the authorizers.
Right.
The authorizers are instructed to come up with savings, but rescission is an appropriations process. So for this bill to come to the floor, going to have to go in the Senate, going to have to go through Susan Collins's hands and through Shelley Moore Capito's hands. Shelley Moore Capito is the chair of the subcommittee on appropriations, and Susan Collins is the chair of the full committee. And those two individuals are not generally thought of as being cost savers for the taxpayers. And we're going to have our work cut out for us to get Susan Collins and Shelley Moore Capito on board to eliminate funding, force taxpayer subsidies to these left-wing media outlets.
Okay, well, any bite at that apple would make the world a better place, would be a good place to start. Now,
Grover, but no, we should never be funding media outlets. You don't get any federal taxpayer dollar support.
No.
Daily Wire, Daily Signal, Fox News, they don't get any funding. Why should NPR and PBS get our tax dollars? It just needs to come to an end.
It is crazy. Can you give us a couple examples about how it ends up being a biased news source in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean,
so
I agree
PBS,
with you. It shouldn't exist even if it was perfect, right? Any more than a government-run steel mill should exist even if it did a really good job. The government shouldn't do certain things. Not that they can make steel or the news very well. But what are some examples that people could share with neighbors and friends?
Yeah, and here at the Media Research Center, we've been documenting this bias for decades, literally. Just a couple recent examples. PBS covering the Republican convention and the Democrat convention.
Uh-huh.
They gave positive coverage, positive comments throughout the Democrat convention, 80+% of the time. When covering the Republican convention, it was negative coverage 90-some% of the time. So slanted on, again, PBS. PBS during a certain period of time used the term far right or extreme right 126 times. How many times did they use the term far left? 6 times. Everything is slanted, against the right in favor of the left. You can look at their guests. Rarely do these outlets ever have a Republican or a conservative or a right-leaning person. They're almost always left-leaning people. They're interviewing, former Obama people instead of Trump appointees to various boards. It's just constant. And of course, what they don't cover, they refuse to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story, but they certainly covered that Trump was a Russian asset story. It's constant coverage favoring the left over the right.
I remember decades ago, I used to do NPR with some regularity, and particularly Wisconsin and public radio for some reason was very open. Both of those ended. I mean, that's just, I don't think I've done NPR in decades, and even Wisconsin.
Well, they're not interested in your point of view, Grover. They're interested in Center for American Progress, but not yours.
Yeah,
it is a constant approach to push a left-wing narrative. That's what NPR, PBS have become. They've only gotten worse over the years.
Yeah,
and they demand more of our tax dollars.
The Soviet Union had TASS and Pravda and so on. I understand why non-democratic countries, non-free countries have run media. I don't understand why the United States would run a media outlet. Quick question. What happens with Wikipedia?
Wikipedia, it was founded to democratize the encyclopedia, to make it cheaper for people to have access to information, a really noble, great thing. And of course, I remember, being early on, sort of the cautionary tale was, well, you can't cite it for research purposes because it's not necessarily verifiable. It's a very different story today. The radical left has taken over Wikipedia, and through their very aggressive editorial process, everything again is slanted to the hard left. And here's the nexus between the two. The most recent CEO or president of NPR, or the current president of NPR, just came out of Wikipedia. She was running Wikipedia for years. They are both being pushed hard to the left. And we've done a number of studies. Trump's nominees, scandalous what Wikipedia did with regard to Trump's nominees. They literally eliminated medals that had been awarded to Pete Hegseth. They literally concocted stories that they added to Kash Patel's site, just tried to skewer these people as they were going through the nomination process. And Vice President Vance, what they did, 886 edits made essentially overnight on his website when Trump was trying to decide who his VP running mate was going to be. They just completely skewered his website, trying to turn, very noble, good things that he had done, creating a not-for-profit to fight the opioid epidemic, and trying to turn it into some accusation that he is now a shill of big pharma. It just over and over and over. Wikipedia is trying to persuade Americans that the right is evil and the left has all the answers.
Is there a center-right or a neutral alternative to Wikipedia? In the same way that sometimes the left does something, you can set up a competing structure on the right to balance it out.
I think that there have been efforts, but it is so expensive to get started in these things. There are better alternatives for like search engines and that sort of thing. Wikipedia, we don't really have an alternative to it. But at least the American public, if they know that Wikipedia is biased, then they can dig deeper into various issues. But there are some questions that Congress can ask and have oversight hearings of Wikipedia. What is going on here? Wikipedia is a not-for-profit. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit. And so Congress does have oversight authority here to ensure that Wikipedia is actually serving the public interest and not serving a political interest.
Okay. Well, Dan Schneider, what can taxpayers, conservatives do to be most helpful on your two projects or to keep in touch with you at the Media Research Center?
Well, Grover, first of all, I want to thank you. You were the first organization, ATR, was the first to start promoting, encouraging people to contact their members of Congress to defund NPR and PBS. I really appreciate that ATR took that lead. We're doing the same thing here at the Media Research Center, and we've also formed a coalition of right-of-center groups the Defund Coalition. So we're going to encourage all of our members to have their followers, their supporters, their members contact members of Congress to say, support this rescission package that President Trump is going to be sending to Congress. We've got to get as much people calling in, because we do know that NPR has already launched its effort asking its listeners to call in saying, please force taxpayers to continue subsidizing us. We need to have a counter attack on that. So people can learn more.
They're lobbying on the taxpayers' dollar using their radio and TV?
It's unlawful to do it, but of course NPR and PBS do it anyway. And they'll claim, well, we're using a different pot of money for it, but cash is fungible, Grover.
Oh, for heaven's
But people can
sakes.
learn more. Defund pbsnpr.org, and people can sign the petition. They can contact their member of Congress at defund pbsnpr.org.
Okay, that's Dan Schneider with the Media Research Center. Thank you so much, Dan. And that was Dan Schneider. Thank you very much. Great conservative leader here in Washington, D.C. So that's it for today's episode of Leave Us Alone. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this discussion valuable, please rate, review, and share the podcast. It helps us to reach more freedom-loving listeners. And we'll be back next time with more insights on protecting your liberty, your paycheck. Until then, I'm Grover Norquist, reminding you to cherish your freedom and keep pushing for a government that simply leaves us alone.